You know, it seems like every single time we review one of these budget AV receivers from Costco, something happens that just completely turns everything on its head. Just a couple of weeks ago, we recommended the new Denon AVR S760H in our review. And now Costco has yet another entry-level AVR for us to check out, the Onkyo TX-NR6050. So that's why today we're going to be taking a look at this new value AVR from Costco to see if it can pull ahead of Denon's latest offering. So if that sounds like something you'd be interested in, then stick around and we'll get into it right after the intro. Alright, so as I just mentioned, Costco just came out with a new AVR, this time from Onkyo, the TX-NR6050. This seems like pretty good news for lots of you guys out there who haven't been able to get your hands on Denon's new AVR S760H, which we reviewed not too long ago. And if you want to see that video, we'll be sure to leave a link down in the description below. Anyway, let's get right into it. The 6050 is part of Onkyo's new lineup of AVRs for 2021 and 2022, and it's actually pretty affordable, coming in at $499. This does put it slightly above the Denon S760H Costco price of $449, but we'll see if the features and sound quality can make up for that $50 difference. With all that out of the way, we can take a look inside the box, which has pretty much everything you'd expect, like a quick start guide, a remote control, some AM and FM antennas, and a calibration microphone for the built-in AccuEQ room correction. Of course, we also have the receiver itself, and first impressions are actually pretty good. The 6050 is a 7.2 channel Dolby ATMOS and DTS:X receiver that's designed to output 90 watts per channel into an 8 ohm load. On the front, we have a pretty nice looking plastic faceplate with Onkyo's signature green LED display that I personally really like. Below the display, we also have a lot of buttons to switch between different inputs on the receiver, which can come in especially handy for testing, and it's very easy to use. We also have the volume knob, some navigation buttons for going through the built-in setup menu, and some tone control buttons. Everything here looks premium, and overall I think it would fit well in a lot of different setups, but of course none of that matters if it doesn't have the features to back it up. Thankfully though, the 6050 is actually one of Onkyo's new HDMI 2.1 receivers, meaning it supports up to 4K 120Hz or 8K 60Hz signals over HDMI for gaming. We'll definitely be sure to test this later in the video, but for now it's really good to know that Onkyo is being competitive with their lower end receivers. Moving around to the back of the 6050, we have pretty much everything you would expect, like 9 sets of binding posts running up to a 5.2.2 Dolby Atmos setup with an extra pair of Zone 2 speakers, but of course, using these connectors will disable 2 of your surround or height channels. We also have 6 HDMI inputs, 3 of which are HDMI 2.0B, while the other 3 are HDMI 2.1 compatible. The 6050 also gives you 2 HDMI outputs, which is very uncommon at this price range, and everything else you'd also expect, like subwoofer and Zone 2 pre-outs, AM and FM tuners, digital audio inputs, a phono preamp, and some analog stereo inputs as well. We'll go ahead and put all of the other important specifications on the screen here so you can get a feel for everything that this receiver offers, because honestly, there's so many different features that we'd have a hard time listing them all out. I also think it's worth noting here that the 6050 is pretty much just a cost-reduced version of Onkyo's higher-end TX-NR6100. Looking at the product pages for each receiver, they're pretty much exactly the same, except for a couple of key differences. The 6100 is rated to push out 100 watts per channel into 8 ohms, while the 6050 is only rated for 90 watts. It is a pretty small difference, and in regular use you probably wouldn't even notice it, but it is worth mentioning. The other big thing that the 6050 is missing is THX certification. The 6100 is THX certified, but honestly this doesn't really mean a whole lot to us because all it says is that Onkyo ponied up the extra money to get the certification and licensed the THX logo. We don't doubt that THX certification represents some sort of minimum quality standard, but honestly it just brings extra cost to the consumer, which isn't what you want if you're looking for a budget AVR. Other than that, the 6050 and 6100 seem to be almost identical. Of course, we can't say that for sure without having both AVRs to compare inside and out, and we'd love to hear if anyone else has had the opportunity to compare these head to head, but as of right now, that is what we think. All of these features put it in the same league as something like the Denon S760H, which we'll keep making comparisons to throughout the rest of the video. But anyway, one thing that we noticed while we were shooting all of our footage of this receiver is that Onkyo actually put a fan above the HDMI board, presumably to help with cooling. We thought this was pretty interesting and we wanted to take a closer look, so we went ahead and removed the top of the receiver. We think it's actually really neat to look inside these AVRs, and we're happy with what we found here. A decently sized transformer, a fan, and some aluminum heat sinks on the HDMI board, and just a pretty decent looking internal layout. We understand that some people are really skeptical of Onkyo, and the HDMI board failures that some of their receivers have experienced in the past doesn't help. But thankfully, these failures have not been a problem in their newer lines of receivers. But to us, the added fan and heatsink seemed like Onkyo almost admitting the issues and putting in some sort of measures to help fix them. Obviously, we've only had a very limited amount of time to test this receiver, so we can't speak for the longevity of a solution like this, but we're happy to see manufacturers trying to improve their products in any way possible. Of course, we'd always recommend using something like an AC Infinity fan to give your components maximum airflow and extend their life, and we actually reviewed some AC Infinity gear recently on the channel, and if you want to check that video out, we'll leave a link down in the description below. Thankfully though, this receiver ran pretty cool throughout all of our testing, but if you're putting your AVR in an enclosed space like we are, it never hurts to have more airflow. Anyway, I think it's actually time to get this receiver hooked up so we can start doing our listening tests. We'll be putting the 6050 through its paces in our living room home theater setup with our 5.1.2 Dolby ATMOS setup to see how well it can play some 4K UHD movies and 120Hz games. Some of the speakers that we'll be testing with are from Aperion Audio's Novus line, like their 6T towers for the front left and right and the 5C center channel. All of these speakers are 4 ohms, meaning we'll be giving this receiver a pretty heavy workload throughout all of our testing. We're also using Aperion's A5 height modules for our Dolby Atmos channels, which fit right on top of the towers in a bounce Atmos configuration, and obviously, as we've said before, this isn't the most ideal way to run a Dolby Atmos setup, but the most important thing was to put a lot of stress on the AVR, which these definitely do with their 6 ohm impedance. Finally, we also have a pair of Vandersteen VSM1 surrounds on the walls to complete the 5-channel surround. In total, we'll be driving 7 different channels with this AVR, so it should be a pretty good test to max out every connection. Once we had all of our speakers hooked up, we quickly went ahead and set up the receiver, which was surprisingly straightforward. In our review of Onkyo's old TX-NR6050, we noticed that they use a pretty nice looking menu system, and we see the exact same interface here. The 6050 has a way better UI than any of the other receivers that we've reviewed recently, including the Denon S760H, to a point that really it's not even funny. Just compare this to the Denon's interface and yeah, not very impressive. We hope more manufacturers take the time to actually build a usable setup interface for their receivers with features like a full graphical multiband EQ for each channel, but right now we feel Onkyo are pretty much the only guys doing it right at this price point. With that said, Onkyo also includes their own Accu EQ room correction in their receivers as compared to the Odyssey room correction that Denon includes with their S760H. We usually don't test the room correction features built into receivers because our results might not be the same as yours, and we've never really had great luck with these auto room EQ programs, especially at these lower price points, and we don't want this to be representative of the receiver's performance. For us, we just want to know what these AVRs are capable of right out of the box. So that's pretty much exactly what we did. After setting our speaker configuration, we put in a few movies and started listening. I don't think we were expecting a whole lot from this pretty affordable receiver trying to drive 7 separate channels with Dolby Atmos, but this receiver managed to prove us wrong pretty quick. Every single movie we threw at this thing sounded great, and even the extra Atmos channels crossed over at 100Hz seemed to add extra immersion and sort of space to the sound. Vocals were very clear through the center channel, with each channel being very distinct and never sounding bloated or confused. Everything was very well pronounced. We noticed this a little bit with the TX-NR595, but we feel that the effect is way enhanced here on the 6050. So all in all, for the price tag, we were really impressed with the sound quality of this AVR, and we actually feel this receiver might have just edged out the Denon S760H just a little bit in sound quality, but that would also be in accordance with its higher price tag. Of course, the other thing that we needed to test before we could give this receiver our seal of approval is HDMI 2.1 capability. We went ahead and hooked up our PS5 to one of the 8K inputs on the back and made sure to enable 8K enhanced mode for that port and got to testing. we enabled HDR10 on the PS5, and running it at 3840 by 2164K, we were able to output 120Hz at YCbCr 422 for a total link speed of 32 gigabit. As you can see here in Rocket League, we're getting a full 4K at 120Hz, and it seems to be working perfectly according to both the PS5 and the AVR itself. Of course, the PS5 is internally limited to only output up to a 32 gigabit signal, as opposed to something like the Xbox Series X, which is capable of outputting a full 40 gigabit signal, but unfortunately we do not have the ability to test that right now. Onkyo does rate the 6050 for supporting up to 40 gigabit link speed though, so that should be absolutely fine. Make sure you check the comments below because we'll be sure to pin the first person we see who can confirm that they've gotten the Xbox Series X to work at 40 gigabit on this AVR, which we imagine will happen pretty soon. Other than that, having full HDMI 2.1 capability, the Onkyo also claims support for everything else you'd expect, like VRR, ALLM, and quick frame transport, and pretty much all those other gaming features, which actually makes this a pretty solid option if you want to get surround sound from your new next-gen console and make full use of a modern TV. So that leaves us with the elephant in the room. How does this compare head-to-head with the Denon AVR S760H that we just recommended to everybody as our top pick for a budget AVR from Costco? Well, to be honest, it's pretty darn close. Even when you consider the slightly higher price tag of the Onkyo, it's hard to ignore things like the higher power rating, as well as features like a second 8K HDMI output, dedicated Zone 2 outputs that you can use by just clicking a few buttons rather than having to swap out cables, and a much better user interface. I feel like the best way to explain this is that both the Onkyo and the Denon are amazing AV receivers for the Costco price points, and personally I don't think you can go wrong with either one. But in our opinion, it is worth the extra money if you can get the Onkyo TX-NR6050 and you can get past some of the issues that plagued some of their receivers in the past. So, with all that said, I think it's just about time to wrap up this video. We had a lot of fun testing this one, and we're really surprised with what Onkyo is able to bring to the table, but let us know what you guys think down in the comments section below. Would you even consider a receiver like the Onkyo TX-NR6050? If you found this video helpful, don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring the bell so you don't miss any of our future content, and as always, have an awesome day.